I've been reading one of my favorite works from the ancient world, probably one of my favorite books ever, and that is the Iliad. I've discovered a new translation by Stephen Mitchell, and if you haven't read the Iliad, this might be a great place to start. I've read it I don't know how many times, and I'm trying to read it cover to cover now. And there's also an Audible version with Stephen Mitchell's translation. The narration is just superb. But if you're a little bit more, bougie, you can get Robert Fagel's translation. I think some of the translations pay more attention to rhyme scheme and meter, trying to translate the Greek, meter into English meter. It's a complicated thing, but it makes the translations, I think, slightly less readable for modern English people, because it could be seen as, even though it's more artsy, it's almost, in some ways more beautiful, but in some ways they're forcing the story into this sort of arbitrary rhythm and meter. That's just my opinion. It's probably not correct. But if you just want to read it like a book, man, Stephen Mitchell's, this is my daughter's copy, by the way. She had to read this for school, and I was really proud of her. She made a lot of sense of it. But this is, Stephen Mitchell's translation is just really sort of raw storytelling, almost like reading a modern book. But in rereading this, it brought to mind one of my favorite movies, probably of all time. That is Gladiator. It turns out that movie didn't have, I don't think, much of a script. It turns out that some of the best scenes in that movie that really made it work were the idea of Russell Crowe and not Ridley Scott. But I think Gladiator was sort of an anomaly. It's a movie that really worked well, whereas, in my opinion, most movies about the ancient world, about the medieval world, don't work. They're almost insulting to me. And I think it's for a very simple reason, and I just want to give you a few examples. It's for the same reason I think so many people read the Bible today and don't understand it, or they misread it, or they miss huge themes. I think we often read ancient literature like modern people, understandably, but in these movies, like Troy or Kingdom of Heaven, a movie I was disappointed in, I think what you do is the filmmakers, the writers, just can't comprehend how ancient people thought, how ancient readers thought, how people who would have been in these events, should they have been real, would have acted. And what they do instead is they read modern thinking, modern political views, modern motivations into the text of ancient stories and books. We tend to read things very literally, or even imbue it with our own assumptions about the world, about human nature, that we don't share with ancient people. I think a lot of people do this with the book of Genesis, and I think it's caused a lot of issues. So some of the reasons that I've loved the Iliad, which is a poem or a story about Ilium or Troy, is, it's hard to quantify or qualify why I really loved this book in my 20s, and I still love it. It's pre-Christian, it's pagan, it's violent. The motivations some of the actions are not, I don't think, in accord with the teachings of Christ, but so much of it is relatable, deeply just meaningful. I just want to give you a few examples, and I'll give a few examples why I think Troy, the movie, really succeeds in capturing the Homeric spirit.
Is this what you left me for?
But then in every other point, as far as I can tell, in my humble opinion, fails to understand Homer. So the Iliad, of course, is about the Trojan War, and the book begins, spoilers, it's divided into multiple books, 24 books, and book 1 begins with a person asking a question. Why all this rage? The theme right off the bat in Greek epic fashion is telling us the theme of the book, rage. Why is it that Achilles was able to slaughter so many people? Why all this carnage? Why so many corpses that were eaten by animals? What god caused this? And immediately we're already starting to see the difference between a modern film thinking and the ancient book. Because in the ancient world, and I think this is true of the Bible, though the view of the gods or God is very different, one thing that ancients thought was that God's acting in the world was not always in direct competition with human or natural actions in the world. I think this is true of the Bible. So if God, and I believe God exists, acts in the world, in the modern world since David Hume, we have debates about, is a miracle a violation of nature? David Hume would use violent language. Is God violating nature when the laws of nature, what we with our modern reason and science have understood when he acts in the world? And I would think, no, not to the ancients. And in fact, the correct view, in my view, is that when God acts in the world, he doesn't do this in a violation of nature. It's his creation. He's just another causal factor. And sometimes God, as the first cause or primary cause, works through instrumental causes. And I think that really explains a lot of the views of the miraculous that I think sometimes still happen in the world. This is the view of the ancients as well. So sometimes there's examples in Homer where the gods or goddesses would act through human beings to accomplish what they want. In fact, the goddesses are jealous of Paris because he chose, I believe it was Aphrodite, as the most beautiful amongst them. And that jealousy and rage that it spins them into causes them to do actions in the world. Zeus implants a dream into Agamemnon's head and causes Agamemnon to do things in the world. Zeus was sort of the primary cause, but Agamemnon, or men, humans, were the instrumental cause. But then in Book 1 it goes a little further. Apollo caused this rage and carnage. And the theme of rage is later as you know, is redirected. Achilles and King Agamemnon feel dishonored by each other. They have rage towards each other, but Achilles' rage is redirected towards the Trojans, to the destruction of the Trojans. It's interesting to me, I think the Bible rhymes, there's a little bit of a rhyme in the Iliad, I think. In Book 1, a priest of Apollo, and this starts the carnage. By the way, the movie starts like, I think the whole thing takes like a couple of weeks in the movie. They're in, I think, right around year 10 in the book of this war. The movie Troy borrows from post-Homerica by a later poet from around the 2 to 400s AD named Quintus Smyrnius, and I'm about to read that. He might have been a Christian, I don't know, but he sort of finishes what happens after Homer's tale ends. The movie ends in a very different place than Homer's book, and they're sort of with the death of Achilles, the destruction of Troy, Aeneas getting out to go found a new Troy, which the Romans picked up on with Virgil. This book begins and ends in a different place than the movie. It begins with a priest whose daughter was taken as the spoils of war, and Agamemnon has this young lady in his tent, and he likes her. He thinks that she equals his wife in beauty, in form, and probably womanly skills, probably like looming. And so when the priest of Apollo comes to Agamemnon, hey, I need my daughter back, and I'm prepared to offer you this, amazing ransom for my daughter. Agamemnon instead says, no, I'm going to keep your daughter. She'll serve me till she dies. Get out of my tent before I kill you. And the priest leaves, and he weeps, and in anger and in despair he calls out to Apollo, and the god comes down and immediately begins slaughtering the cattle and eventually the men of the Greek army. And so Achilles later the people come to Agamemnon and say, you need to give up this woman. Give her back to the priest of Apollo. We've angered the gods. And Agamemnon then feels dishonored. Here's another key theme of the book. In the ancient world and medieval world, honor was a way that they saw things. No, I think there are still men today with honor who live honorably. But we've sort of stripped away the belief in honor as a real thing. And we still want men to be brave in certain situations, and some men are, but modern philosophy, modern culture has stripped away the belief in honor. But this is how the ancients saw things. So Agamemnon, I don't think his actions are literally actually honorable. He saw himself being dishonored by Achilles. He said, okay, so I'm the great King Agamemnon. But all of you have spoils of war. You all have women that you took, gold, wealth, whatever that you took from Trojans from war. It's not fitting and right that I, the greatest king, should have no woman, and all of you do. So instead what I'll do, if you take my woman, I will come to you, Ajax, or you, Odysseus, and I'll come into your tent and take yours, because you've dishonored me. It's not right that I should give up mine. And so eventually he takes it a little too far, and by too far he crosses a line with Achilles, and he says, Achilles, I'm going to come and take your woman.
You sack of wine.
And so there's really two women involved here that Achilles has and Agamemnon has taken as the spoils of war. The book then begins with the priest, the father of one of these women, Chryses, asking for his child. But if you flash forward toward the end of the book, how does it end? Well, it ends with King Priam, the king of Troy, mourning his son, mourning Hector, the great prince, the mightiest, bravest man in Troy. And after Achilles feels dishonored by Hector, because Hector has slain his cousin Patroclus. And the film places more emphasis on them being cousins, but I don't think really places the emphasis properly on these people were friends, brothers in arms. It's almost like the idea of being brothers in arms was in some way deeper than being cousins. And so in revenge and anger and despair and fury and rage, as the poem begins, Achilles takes Hector's body and drags him behind his chariot around the city, trying in front of his family, trying to maim and distort and, break the body of Hector, but the gods protect it, which I think enrages Achilles further. But eventually, King Priam comes through the help of a goddess and finds Achilles in his tent. And in this strange twist, they have a bonding moment where Achilles can finally relate to King Priam. And this is a father. I have a father, this is a father. And King Priam, just like the priest in the beginning asking for his child, King Priam is asking for his child, the body of his son. And so you have these themes of the gods working in and through the actions of men, almost as an explanatory mechanism for the Greeks. Now, scholars debate whether the Trojan War, how much of it is legendary. In my opinion, this is just my opinion, the ramblings of a guy who romanticizes and has an affinity towards the ancient world. I think scholars are a bit too skeptical in general of things in the ancient world, because I've read some scholarship about various things where I think they go far too much into skepticism. An event this monumental, I suspect, happened, and these stories are the Greeks finding a way to make sense of it. And the gods acting in, taking sides, fighting amongst themselves, betraying, lying, deceiving, getting angry, loving Achilles, loving Hector, shunning Paris, etc., are them sort of making sense of whatever happened. Now, I'm sure it's been romanticized in the story, but did something like this happen? I wouldn't be surprised at all. But you have the gods acting in the world, and doing things and causing things to be done. And then you have this deep sense of honor, and then you have the rage of Achilles, which I do think is in the film. But in the ancient world, I don't think the filmmakers could understand why this war would have been fought to the ancients. And this is where I think the film just, though it has some scenes that work really well, it really starts to lose it. Just at a deep level. So the Trojan War in Homer wasn't fought for imperialism. It wasn't fought for some kind of conniving political gain.
History remembers kings, not soldiers. I'll carve Agamemnon in the stone. My name will last through the ages. Your name is written in sand.
It was fought for Helen. And it's beyond the comprehension of Ridley Scott as to how these people would have fought a world war, essentially, for a woman. surely there must have been some sort of imperialism or capitalism or greed, or it was for Helen. The war was fought for Helen, just as the rage of Achilles was turned on Agamemnon over this woman. Now, why is that? Well, Helen was obviously, in the stories, an immensely beautiful, desirable woman. But she had many suitors, and all of these powerful men who wanted to marry Helen agreed when she chose a suitor, when she chose a husband, that they would honor that marriage. And to break that marriage vow, is not just between that man and the woman, it's their covenant between themselves, yes, but it's the social fabric of all these other men involved who gave up the right to Helen to maintain order because she chose this person. And when Paris took Helen, it was dishonoring to them all. It was a betrayal. It was against the social order. And they had basically committed themselves to anyone who broke this marriage, these vows, were willing to fight over this, were willing to die over this, and they did. Meanwhile, the filmmakers had to import, if you will, their own political views, sort of not romantically, but cynically. There's hardly any mention of the gods at all, which is criminal for a movie about a Homeric story. They're referenced, there's a temple, Priam believes in the gods, Hector in the movie seems to be very skeptical of the gods, and there's hints and whispers, and I don't know that they should have shown the gods arguing and quarreling or acting, but they really should have done something more to deeply embed the gods acting in the world, in this Homeric world. Instead, I think you almost have a skeptical view of the gods, almost sort of an atheism, sort of bleeding into this Homeric world, and that's a shame. So with an attenuated view of honor, though it's still in the film, the gods fairly absent, and really I think this whole misconstrued notion of modern political gain, imperialism, forced onto the Homeric text, they misunderstand what the war was about, what these people believed in, what they fought and died for, because they didn't think the way that we think. And so what I think you're left with is not a movie about ancient times. I think you have a very modern story set in an ancient Homeric world. And other movies, I think, like The Kingdom of Heaven, fare even worse. Ironically, I think that while The Gladiator was a movie that didn't have as much of a script, it wasn't as thought out, it actually worked better because it wasn't trying to be something that it couldn't be. It was just a movie about a simple man who had honor, who believed in his country, who believed in his gods, and served, and then the gods, so to speak, had some sort of ironic twist of fate, which is in very keeping with Homer or Virgil. And this sort of stoic, reserved man is forced into a situation. And I think the whole story actually works with an ancient view of the world. And the movies that try to sort of be profound, like The Kingdom of Heaven, are sort of profoundly atheist. No, I'm not talking down to you if you are an atheist, but my point is, that view doesn't really work, reading it into the way that these people saw the world. So I wanted to like this movie a lot more than I did, but I would recommend before you watch the movie, or even if you have seen the movie, just read the book. So as always, I just want to let you know that I really do appreciate you guys taking time to watch. I know you could be doing any other thing, and for you to come into my library, so to speak, and just talk with me about romantic old ancient ideas, or religion, or philosophy, or anything like this, I want you to know I do appreciate it. But as always, so thank you for taking time to watch. Please know that your life matters. Someone somewhere does love you. So take care of yourself. And thanks for watching. God bless.